This week, the president signed 14 executive orders and proclamations, with 2 executive orders amending or superseding previous orders. No orders were revoked. There were 20 new or updated lawsuits. Key themes this week include mental health awareness, hurricane preparedness, support for small businesses, and efforts to streamline regulations. Several actions focus on the safety and security of biological research, particularly addressing gain-of-function research and its potential risks. Other actions targeted domestic production of critical medicines, aiming to eliminate regulatory barriers. Several proclamations designated specific observances, including National Mental Health Awareness Month, National Hurricane Preparedness Week, National Small Business Week, Victory Day for World War II, National Foster Care Month, Mother's Day, and Military Spouse Day. Countries affected by executive actions include China, the Central African Republic, Syria, Germany, Iraq, and Lebanon. Significant changes include the establishment of Project Homecoming, which offers financial incentives for illegal aliens to voluntarily leave the United States, while outlining penalties for those who remain. Another executive order addresses overcriminalization in federal regulations, prioritizing civil enforcement and requiring agencies to justify criminal regulatory offenses. Furthermore, a presidential memorandum directs federal agencies to expedite efforts to protect the Great Lakes from invasive carp, urging Illinois to cooperate with the Brandon Road Interbasin Project. Additionally, the National Center for Warrior Independence was established to support homeless veterans and improve services provided by the Department of Veterans Affairs. In court actions, numerous cases challenge Presidential Proclamation 10,903 concerning Alien Enemies Act removals. In GFF v. Trump in the Southern District of New York, Judge Hellerstein granted a preliminary injunction on May 6. Similarly, in DBU v. Trump in the District of Colorado, Judge Sweeney granted a preliminary injunction on May 6. In JGG v. Trump in the District of Columbia Circuit, plaintiffs filed a reply in support of their motion for a preliminary injunction on May 5. In WMM v. Trump in the Northern District of Texas, Judge Hendricks denied class certification on May 9. In JOP v. United States Department of Homeland Security in the District of Maryland, on May 4, defendants filed a motion to vacate or stay the judge's order requiring the return of the plaintiff. On May 5, the court denied in part and granted in part the motion, granting a stay until May 8. On May 7, the government appealed to the Fourth Circuit, which granted an administrative stay on May 8. In Doe v. Nome in the District of Massachusetts, the First Circuit denied the defendant's petition for a stay on May 5, and on May 8, the defendants petitioned the Supreme Court for an emergency stay. In Ozturk v. Hyde in the District of Vermont, Judge William Sessions ordered the immediate release of Rumesa Ozturk on May 9, after the Second Circuit rejected the defendant's appeal on May 7. In Madawi v. Trump in the District of Vermont, the Second Circuit denied the government's appeal on May 9. In American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations versus Social Security Administration in the District of Maryland, the Fourth Circuit granted an en banc hearing on the merits on May 6. In Personal Services Contractor Association versus Trump in the District of Columbia, defendants filed their opposition to the plaintiff's preliminary injunction motion on May 7. In Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights versus United States Department of Homeland Security in the District of Columbia, plaintiffs filed a motion for a preliminary injunction on May 8. In American Federation of Government Employees, American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations versus Trump in the Northern District of California, Judge Susan Ilston granted a temporary restraining order on May 9. In State of Rhode Island versus Trump in the District of Rhode Island, Judge John McConnell granted a preliminary injunction on May 6. Regarding cases related to governance and defunding of global media, in RFERL, Incorporated versus Lake in the District of Columbia, the plaintiffs filed an emergency appeal for an en banc stay on May 4, and the District of Columbia Circuit en banc stayed the panel's order on May 7. Similar outcomes occurred in Witakaswara versus Kari Lake, Abramowitz versus Lake, Radio Free Asia versus United States, and Middle East Broadcasting Networks versus United States, with the District of Columbia Circuit en banc staying the panel's order on May 7th. In Chicago Women in Trades versus Trump in the Northern District of Illinois, Judge Kennelly denied the plaintiff's motion to modify the preliminary injunction order on May 7th. In Learning Resources Incorporated versus Trump in the District of Columbia, plaintiffs filed their opposition to the Trump administration's motion to transfer and replied in support of their motion for a preliminary injunction on May 7th. In Oregon versus Trump in the United States Court of International Trade, the plaintiff states filed a motion for a preliminary injunction on May 7th. In Schilling versus Trump in the Western District of Washington, the Supreme Court issued a stay on May 6th. In State of New York versus United States Department of Education in the Southern District of New York, Judge Edgardo Ramos granted a preliminary injunction on May 6th. For full details on these actions, please refer to the 47 POTUS application. This summary was created by 47 POTUS and narrated by an automated voice.